today. Maybe we won't get to it today. We'll get to it tomorrow, the day after, or next week. I want to start circling around the subject with a few observations about everyday life, everybody's lives, and then hopefully when we get to the center of the problem, we'll be able to see something which will give us some orientation. Let's start with the idea of pride. I don't want to talk now about whether pride is good or bad, but let's just talk about what we are proud of. What kinds of things make us proud? Let's say about ourselves. What kinds of things, and people vary, and psychology isn't the same, but there are some things where if a person said he was proud, you'd understand him. And there are other things where if a person said he was proud, you would find it very odd, very peculiar to say he was proud of that. What kinds of things is it understandable that a person should say, I'm proud of that? Say again?
Accomplishment.
Oh. I think that word's going to be very important here. Accomplishments. Accomplishments. Let's see. Let's take a condition of life which you could have either because you made it for yourself or because it happened without any effort on your part. There are people, I know a few, who are thin because of their metabolism. They can eat and drink anything they want in any quantities, and they stay thin. I know other people who diet seriously and are thin. Do you think that they could be equally proud of being thin? Wouldn't it be natural that the person who put an effort into it and whose effort was key in producing his appropriate weight would be prouder of being of appropriate weight than someone whose just genes are that way? Let's take someone who has a lot of money. Let's take someone who, as you say, is an accomplishment. He worked hard for it. You have three cases. Worked hard for it, inherited it, and won the lottery. Now, if a person can be proud of having a lot of money at all, it seems if he worked hard and he managed to earn that money, then he has the money, and having the money is an accomplishment, as you say. Suppose he inherited it from his ancestors. Well, then you might say he's proud of his family. Could say that. But suppose he wins the lottery. Could he be proud of having so much money if the way that he got it was winning the lottery? Let me try to make this even sharper. Let's suppose that the person's hired to do a job, and he's given a certain production quota. He's programming and he's doing research and turning things out, and there's an automatic program that monitors his activities and rates his output. And he gets paid in terms of his output. And he goes weeks after week, and each week he gets better, and the output gets larger, and he starts making a significant amount of money. At the end of the year, let's say he's made $150,000, and he's very happy. Now, suppose somebody, at the end of the year, his boss calls him in and says, listen, I have something to tell you. You have a rich uncle that you don't know about. And your rich uncle cares about you. And he wants to help you. And he paid us to hire you. And he paid us to feed you results of your productivity which aren't true. So you feel good about it. But really, he gave us $150,000 and said, hire him for a year. I want him to have $150,000. Would that deflate you? I think it would. You got the money. You could take your trip to Europe. But You didn't make it. You didn't create it. It was just given to you. It's hard to feel pride of something which was just given to you. It's much easier to feel pride about things which you created for yourself. I'm not sure that this is universal, that there couldn't be exceptions. I'm a little fuzzy on the concept of pride. I'm not alone. But I think that pride, it's being an accomplishment, contributes to the pride that you can feel. Okay, now let's take that point and apply it to a law that Maimonides codifies. We have a responsibility for charity, a very far-reaching responsibility for charity. And there are different levels of charity, different kinds of charity. Maimonides has 8 levels. The next to best level of charity is where the donor and the recipient don't know each other. It's totally anonymous. Can you see why that is, given what we just said?
No embarrassment.
Say again?
No embarrassment.
No embarrassment. The guy who's receiving charity is the guy who's getting something for nothing, and the reason we're giving him charity is because he needs it, which means he can't provide for his own needs. Hard to be proud of that. I can't earn a dime. I understand that. You just got a college diploma, right? You can't earn a dime. All you can do is join a DEI test force. Other than that, there's nothing you can do. So you want it to be anonymous, first of all, that the recipient shouldn't be aware the donor knows who he is, because then the donor will look down on him, and vice versa. So now, that's the next to best. Okay, the best level, the top level of the 8 is giving someone a job. Now here's the silly trick question. When you give someone a job, you gave him something, and it's not anonymous. He knows you gave him a job. Why would that be better?
He's earning it.
Yeah, exactly. He's earning his money.
That's right. The end of the week, when he gets his check, he earned it. So there's no embarrassment in having the money, and therefore there's no need for anonymity. Giving a person a job both supports him materially and gives him his self-respect, his self-esteem, his honor. It's a double gift. It's a double gift. Okay, now let me shift now to a Jewish perspective. There are 2 of many principles of divine action, 2 ways that HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with the world, 2 purposes that he has in dealing with the world. One is called loving kindness, and the other is called strict justice. He uses both of them. As I will show you, they're not equal, but he does use both of them. Let's see how they're related, loving kindness and strict justice. Let's imagine a transaction where someone gives someone else money. Is it possible that it should be both loving kindness and justice in the same transaction? Let's see. I give Ruvain $500. Why am I doing that? Well, let's say Ruvain works for me. We signed the contract, and the contract says you work 30 hours a week, you get paid $500. I have his supervisor's report. It says he worked the 30 hours, so I owe him the $500. Justice demands that I give him the $500. If I don't give it to him, I'm victimizing him. When I give him the $500, am I expressing kindness to him? I don't think so. I owe it. I have to pay it. Otherwise, you could take me to court and demand that I pay it. No kindness in that. Kindness is specifically where you do something for someone where you don't owe it to him. He hasn't got any claim on it. He hasn't got a right to it. That's why the motivation is kindness and not justice. It seems that In a single interaction where A gives something to B, it's impossible for it to be an example both of justice and kindness. So if God interacts with the world with both of these principles, the natural thing to assume would be, well, sometimes one and sometimes the other. Maybe sometimes the person needs an interaction of justice, and sometimes the person needs an interaction of kindness, and they'll vary with the circumstances. You could, and that's not unreasonable. But in Jewish philosophy, in particular Kabbalistic philosophy, we are taught that loving kindness is the only ultimate motivation for everything that God does. Everything is an expression of loving kindness. And sometimes loving kindness directs an action of justice. Loving kindness is accomplished through justice, or loving kindness is expressed through justice. Here there's a marry between loving kindness and justice, which now should seem puzzling to us, as we just saw that when A gives B something, it cannot be both loving kindness and justice. How could they be married? How can one give birth to the other if they're contradictory in this way? Contradictory this way. Let's go back to Maimonides. Maimonides said the highest level of charity is giving someone a job. Isn't charity kindness? Isn't charity something the other person hasn't earned? What is a job? Well, a job is where you sign a contract. At the end of the week, the worker gets paid because there's a contract. So paying him at the end of the week is justice. The kindness is in giving him the job. The kindness is in setting up an ongoing relationship of justice. Yes, in a single transaction, it can't be both kindness and justice. But kindness can motivate setting up a relationship of justice, because in the relationship of justice, you have the most exquisite kindness. To review, when you give someone a job, he gets a double benefit. He gets money at the end of the week, and he has his self-esteem, his honor. He has his dignity. So it's a double gift. Interacting with him on a mode of justice with a job gives him that double gift. So the kindness expresses itself in the setting up of the relationship. At the end of the week, when you pay him the $500, that's not kindness at all. You signed the contract, you owe it to him. It's signing the contract and setting it up. That's the idea of loving kindness. Now, that shows you that the idea in Jewish philosophy that loving kindness can give birth to justice is not an impossible idea to understand. The very desire to benefit the other person motivates one to set up that kind of justice relationship. That's a model for how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs with the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is on one level. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world out of loving kindness. Loving kindness means to give a benefit, to help, to provide for, to invest in, to enable the other to have and become all that he can have and become. The mode in which it's accomplished, as you know, is there's a system of mitzvos. Mitzvos are commandments. And the system says, if you perform the commandments, you'll be rewarded, and if not, not. The system of commandments is a system of justice. God is our creator. God is the one who provides us with everything we have. We owe it to him, and he's collecting the debt. And he's saying, this is what you owe me to do this. Why does he set up a system of a world in which there are commandments to be fulfilled and reward and punishment, which is a matter of justice? Why does he set that up? Because he wants us to go from here to the world to come. And in the world to come, there'll be no effort, no earning, no creating, no developing, no free will, no urge to evil. And there we will receive the greatest good imaginable, but he wants us to earn it. He doesn't want it to come without our earning it, because if he did so, it would then be, it would have a demerit, a blemish, that we'd be getting it like a 6-year-old getting an ice cream cone. We'd be painted as complete dependence with no dessert of our own. So because Baruch Hu says, I'm giving you the ability to earn it, so that when you get it, it doesn't have that demerit. The words in the Yerushalmi, I'll answer your question in a second. The words in the Yerushalmi are, Manda ochot alav delay, someone who eats something that's not his own, boys l'stakuli be'apeh, he's embarrassed to look the giver in the face. So the fellow in the back who said embarrassment is exactly right. He's embarrassed to look the giver in the face. So to avoid what's called Nahama de Ksufa, the bread of shame, to avoid the bread of shame, because Baruch Hu gives us the opportunity to earn it. That's what's going on in this world. Yeah.
Wouldn't saying that we owe Kadosh Baruch Hu mitzvot, or however you want to call it, wouldn't that imply that he's lacking something?
Wouldn't it imply that he's lacking something? Well, this is a part of the same question where you ask whether God needs us.
Right.
I think there are two things to say about that question. First of all, if I say that someone needs something, we feel that somehow that's a demerit. A perfect being shouldn't have any needs. Let's push that a little bit. What exactly is the degrading element in having a need? I think the degrading element in having a need is being dependent on something else. Not being self-sufficient. Well, let's think. Does having a need automatically imply not being self-sufficient? Suppose I need X, but I'm perfectly capable, all on my own, with no one's help, to provide X for myself. That kind of need would not imply a dependency on something else. Then you have to ask, why do I need it? And that would be a question we'd have to answer. But the pagam, the blemish in the need, the reason we don't feel comfortable saying that God has needs, I think, is because that would imply that he would be dependent on something else. Not all needs are like that. Not all needs are like that. Now, let's take the idea of perfection. That's one of the key ideas in understanding what the Creator is. Perfection means that than which there is no better. Perfection is something that couldn't be improved. Well, I guess if something's perfect, it must be good. If it weren't good, then it could be improved by becoming good. So certainly goodness is an element of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perfection. Now let's ask, a quality of character, a moral quality that we look at as valuable, is there any difference between having it as a potentiality, if the occasion arises, then this is how I'll act because I have this good quality, or actually using it, actually doing it, where you actually act on the quality and produce the result that the quality requires? Is potential goodness ideal, or is actualized goodness ideal? Does potential goodness have a certain weakness? Yeah, it's what you would do if you could, or if you had to, but you don't have to, so it never gets done. Let's take generosity. Reuven is stranded on a South Sea island, all by himself. Well, he's been taught survival skills, and he's not in danger of dying, but there's nothing there to which he can express his generosity. Okay, if you're Peter Singer, he can express his generosity to the animals. No animals. He's living on coconuts. And if you think you got to express generosity to the trees, we'll talk about some other subjects some other time. There's no opportunity for his generosity to act. So, from our point of view, potential generosity isn't as valuable as actualized generosity. So here, if God has goodness, it won't be satisfactory for it to be just potential goodness. It needs to be actualized goodness. How's he going to actualize the goodness? He's going to actualize the goodness by there being those for whom he can provide, there being those to whom he can give, so that his generosity and his sympathy and his care and his love can be actualized. So he creates the world in order to actualize the qualities that are elements of his perfection. Because otherwise they won't be actualized. It's an expression of his perfection to create a world in which those qualities can be actualized. So the key point here is, what does he need it for? What does he need it for? Not does he need it, but what does he need it for? And here there's a simple divide, although it's more complicated if you go further, but a simple divide. Do I need it for me, or do I need it for something or someone other than me? If I need it for me, that means I lack it. I'm missing it, and I'm dependent on having it. But suppose I need it for the other, because that's how I'm oriented. I'm oriented to do for the other. And my orientation, my project to do for the other, requires there to be an other. Otherwise, there aren't any others. And then I can't do for the other. But then, it's not that I'm lacking something for myself. It's something in me, in my nature, to be expressed, needs another to be given to. And that's not going to be a failure of perfection. On the contrary, it's going to be an expression of perfection. So I think that kind of need is something which we don't have to worry about in terms of associating with God. I think we have to press the. Somebody's hand was up over here. Did I miss it? No. Okay, so now the situation is to avoid the bread of shame. There is a question here. There's a clever question which students sometimes arrive at. Let's try to go through it again and see if you can't pick up where there might be a little slip. God creates the world. Why? Because he wants to benefit. He wants to give the good. Well, just create it and give the good. Yeah, but if I do that, I do it for a human being, then there's going to be a certain shame, a certain embarrassment built into the receiving the good, not having earned it. I want to give that I give people a perfect good with no blemish, with no detracting factor. So, because Baruch Hu sets it up in such a way that we go through a period of earning it, so that when we receive it, we can feel that we earned it, and then there's no embarrassment and no shame in receiving it. Yeah.
Why would there be embarrassment? Just make it so there's no embarrassment?
Say again?
Why would there be embarrassment or shame? Just make it so there's no embarrassment or shame.
Oh, yeah. Why not create us in such a way that we don't feel embarrassment and shame? We can be horses. You feed a horse in the evening, he doesn't care whether he galloped all day, or pulled a cart all day, or lazed around the whole day. Doesn't bother him. Make us like horses. But we don't feel shame. We don't feel embarrassment. And then just take us into the world to come and don't require us to earn it. I think that's a terrific question. This idea of the bread of shame is very widely found in our literature. Very widely found. Including one of the great Jewish philosophers, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who was a great Kabbalist. That's not a contradiction. In the Das Tvunos, writes this idea, word for word. But here's a puzzling thing. He wrote another book called The Derech Hashem, The Way of God. And in chapter 2, he talks about free will, and why free will is important, and what free will accomplishes, and he doesn't mention the bread of shame at all. Not at all. Doesn't hint to it. He has a whole explanation without using the idea of bread of shame at all. When I first read that, I thought to myself, why? The bread of shame is very widespread, very popular, with great scholarly credentials, and now he writes this whole completely different explanation. And then I realized that the explanation, which I'm calling the second one, doesn't have this objection. Because it's not bread of shame. because it's not to avoid the shame you'll feel in the world to come because you didn't earn it. That's not the explanation at all. The question, why didn't God create us without shame, doesn't arise, because it's not shame that's doing it. So I thought, maybe that means that his explanation in the way of God has the virtue of avoiding this problem. And then maybe we'll have to look and see how the two explanations fit together, because you can't just cancel out the bread of shame explanation. It's a great, very popular in our literature, and see that maybe the one in the way of God is a deeper explanation, and thereby avoids the problem of, why don't you create us without shame? So what I'm going to do now is try to give you at least the headlines of the second chapter in the way of God, and you'll see that the question of shame is not mentioned, it's not used, and then, so when we have time, I'll try to put the two of them together. God is creating the world out of loving kindness. The project is to create good, to create creatures to whom will possess good. What is good? Well, if God is perfection, then God is the greatest good. So God then should be creating creatures who will be what? Gods? Other gods? Sort of gods? Like godlike or something? To give them the best possible good. He's not going to be content with a second-rate good. We're talking about a being that's perfect. So what he should be doing is creating creatures to whom he can give godly goodness. Now the Ramchal says, but look, there's a built-in limitation on that, because one element of God's goodness and perfection is that he is entirely self-sufficient. As we said before, doesn't rely on anything else. Nothing else makes him, supports him, improves him, elevates him. He is totally self-contained. That's part of what it is to be God, to be totally self-contained. Well, could we be, each of us, some of us, totally self-contained? There's a big problem with that idea, isn't there? We are, after all, creatures. We're created by God. That's not self-contained. Sorry. He creates us. He maintains our existence continuously. We exist because he's pouring divine energy into us. He's pouring divine concern into us. So we're certainly not self-contained, self-determined. Well, is there a way to carve out a little space, a little chunk in our lives that could be self-contained, self-defined, something that's ours, something that he isn't giving us? There's a name for that. What's the name for it? Free will. Free will means free from divine causation. It means something that he doesn't make happen. Of course, he gives us the capacity of free will, but the decisions aren't decisions that he makes, they're decisions that we make. When we make a free decision, we create something that is ours because we really made it. When we do that, we become similar to God. He's totally, absolutely, and necessarily self-defined. We are partially and contingently, didn't have to be that way, partially, contingently self-defined. But we have a self-defined aspect which is similar to his being self-defined. Nothing else in the creation has that. No squirrels have it. No galaxies have it. No angels have it. They are given their nature by God. They are strictly a creation. Human being is a creation with a creative ability. In exercising that creative ability, the human being becomes similar to the Creator. Now let's review. The Creator is perfection. So something similar to the Creator shares in something which is related to divine perfection. One element of God's perfection is being self-contained, self-determined, self-defined. Human being has some of that. That's what free will is for. Free will is for enabling the human being to become similar to the Creator. Since the Creator is the greatest goodness, the Creator wants to give to the creature His goodness, as much as could be possessed. One element in giving to the creature some of God's goodness is to give us the capacity to be, to some extent, self-defined as He is self-defined. So, the exercise of free will and the use of free will to self-define is what enables us to possess that greatest goodness that God wants to give us. Did you hear the word embarrassment yet? Did you hear the word shame yet? Not mentioned. This is an entirely different project. And now, using this idea of being self-defined, it branches out into many other applications with which we're all familiar. One of the things we're supposed to do is do good, be good, become good. We talked about virtue. We talked about improving our character. So that if a person is merciful, if a person is kind, if a person is just, if he has those qualities of character, he is possessing characteristics that are similar to divine characteristics, and in that way he possesses more of the good that is divine. And that's why God created us, to possess as much of the divine good as we can. Now notice that those moral characteristics depend essentially on free will. A creature who has no free will can't have any of those characteristics. Let me illustrate. Let's say I program my computer with a virtual agent to search the internet and gather together information of a certain type. And every Thursday night, I have a list of email recipients, so that people all over the globe, Friday morning when they wake up, in their inbox, there's this information from Gottleib, free of charge. Now, suppose somebody writes me a letter and he says, I can't get over it. Your computer is so generous. Your computer is so kind. Your computer sends me this free information, which is very useful to me, all that. Well, I really am grateful to your computer. I hope that sounds a little odd to you. The computer is kind. The computer is generous? Not really. Maybe I'm kind of generous, I bought the program and I'm paying the electricity, but the computer is just a machine. Something that operates on automatic pilot, something that's programmed, something that's purely mechanical, can't be kind. It can do things that benefit other people, but it can't do it out of kindness. Kindness isn't in its repertoire. It isn't in its being. Kindness, mercy, generosity, and other moral qualities are only applicable to a being that has free will and makes free decisions and weighs up and can make wrong decisions and sometimes puts effort into making right decisions. That's where moral qualities come from. So giving us free will has a double effect. Number one, it enables us to be like the Creator in being partly self-defined. And also, it enables us to acquire the other moral characteristics which make us more like the Creator. That's the project of free will. The project is to enable us to become similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, those of you who have had a brush with Jewish text, in the beginning of Parshas Noach, it says, Eila told us Noach, these are the things that Noach brought into the world, generations in the sense of generating and bringing it to the world. And it talks about his being, walking with God and being righteous and perfect or pure, right? But there's one word which many commentators don't comment on. It says, Eila told us Noach, Ish, Tzadik, V'tomin, right? V'dorosav. It says, these are the productions of Noach, which means he's his own production. He's producing himself. What the Torah gives us here is the capacity for self-creativity. You imagine a person at the age of 40, and you get to know him and say, wow, I see that you have these and these and these characteristics. How did you come to be that way? If he says, look, if you had seen me when I was 17, you'd have seen something very different. But I worked on it. I decided I wanted to become a certain type of person, and it wasn't easy. There is this story, I don't know if it's really in the Midrash, but a story that someone found that an artist had painted a picture of Moses when he was a youth, and he looked like a robber. Don't think Moses was born Moses. Moses worked to become Moses. That's why when Moses is first introduced into the Torah, you don't know who his parents are. Unlike almost every other hero in the entire Hebrew Bible, when he's first introduced, his parents are anonymous. A few chapters later, it tells you exactly what his genealogy is and all the rest, but not when he's introduced. The Torah doesn't want you to think he's a product of his parents. Of course his parents had an effect on him. It's not as if he's independent, but the fact that he became what he became is because of the effort that he had to put into his own self-creativity. Yeah.
What would be the point of the Torah at all if we didn't have free will?
What would be the point of the Torah at all if we didn't have free will? Well, I think your question is right, but let's just sort of scout it a little bit. I said about 17 minutes ago, or maybe it was 13 or anything, I don't know, that in the world to come, there's no free will. That doesn't mean that the world to come is worthless, it's somehow secondary, or we could just skip it and do without it. There's no Yetzer Hara, there's no evil inclination. Free will requires a draw to the good and a draw to the bad. The draw to the good is in the soul, the draw to the bad is in the body. We'll talk about that. And because they are in conflict with one another, that's why there's free will. In the world to come, there's no draw to evil. So there's no free will. So it can't be essential to human being that we have free will. It can be essential to human being that we go through a period in which we have free will, but it can't be essential to human being, because we are humanly being in the world to come and we don't have free will. So now the idea is, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want to happen in the world to come? Well, what he wants to happen is a certain communion with people who have become godlike enough to be able to relate to him in a very special way. And becoming godlike requires free will, because otherwise we won't be similar to God at all in any way. By the way, having just said what I said, I heard from my oldest son, I'll take a question 1 second, my oldest son, that Yerushalmi that I quoted to you before, Man da'ochad alav delay, bohis lishtakali ba'pei, he who eats from that which is not his own is embarrassed to look the giver in the face. My son said, don't forget about looking him in the face. Why does the Yerushalmi say he's embarrassed to look him in the face? Because a face-to-face relationship is a special kind of relationship. Talk about a face-to-face meeting. In Hebrew, they talk about a four-eyed meeting, a meeting of four eyes, arbeinai, eyes to eyes. A face-to-face meeting is where your whole self is on the line, and his whole self is on the line, and you're relating to each other in an essential way. If a person gets that which is not his, he can't have a face-to-face relationship with the Creator because he's too different from the Creator. Face-to-face relationship requires shared qualities. Not identity, obviously, but shared qualities. The medium of it is shared qualities. So that's what the world to come is supposed to be, that kind of face-to-face relationship which we make possible by acting with our free will to become like the Creator. That's this message of the second chapter of the Way of God. It's a very deep business, very deep chapter. I struggled with it and read it many times. This is just skimming off the top. Yeah, you had a question?
It wasn't me. Somebody else.
Yeah, sorry, right.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
do you think in general, does having more free will keep you closer to God? In terms of having more attention, and let's say when we're doing mitzvot rather than, let's say, doing mitzvot automatically without realizing, or just in general, the capacity to be kind and the capacity to do these other things where otherwise it might be unintentional?
Okay, you're asking a tricky question. It's a nice question. If there are certain qualities that I'm born with, now I spent a year in a yeshiva where there were British boys and American boys and Israeli boys. There was a big difference. Do I have to spell it out to you? In terms of interpersonal character, the British boys were on top, American boys were okay, the Israelis were it was difficult. Their cultures program in them a starting point in life with different characteristics, and in that respect, there was a lot to learn for the British boys. So that's one thing. And there, I think you're right, the fact that I do certain things because my parents trained me that way or brought me up that way, I get very little credit for that, if any. But suppose I face a certain character challenge, and I work hard on it, and I get to the point where, by working hard, I have consistent success, to the point where I program in myself a behavior, and it becomes automatic. I don't lose out when it becomes automatic. You're not using your free will anymore, because my free will created it for me. And that, according to many sources, is the highest success. The highest success, the Meshech Chochmah says that Maimonides lost his free will. And that was the highest success because he trained and programmed his body to be in synonymous with his soul's orientation and his soul's desires, his soul's will. That way there's no competing element. As I said before, the soul is the good inclination, the body is the evil inclination. We spoke about this, the blindness of the body. Just wants what it wants when it wants it. And you can train the body and elevate the body. You know, it's sort of like training a horse. You've probably seen videos of wild horses and what people have to do to tame them. To ride them while they're wild and endure the bucking and outlast the horse with endurance to the point where it becomes exhausted. And then, I don't know how many times you have to do it, I don't know all the detail, but I've seen the idea. And then it will take a rider, and will take a rider happily. And you could have friendly interactions, so to speak, with the horse. You can pet the horse will appreciate it. The horse isn't losing out because it lost its wildness. The horse is benefiting. Here too, you can think of your body as like a wild horse, and you want the body to be guided, managed, programmed to be able to carry out what the soul wants it to do. And when you do that, your free will has created a situation in which the free will no longer exists. That's the ideal accomplishment. As I said before, in the world to come, no one has free will. So it can't be that without free will you're lost. The question is when and under what conditions. So I think that together with appreciating how precious free will is, we have to understand that free will is a means, not an end. It's a tool to accomplish something. And the greatest accomplishment is to elevate yourself to the point where body and soul are in tune with one another, because the body has received, so to speak, programming from the soul. It's received the vision of the soul, and then the two go in partnership, and then there's no struggle anymore. Yeah.
In terms of like human beings being the only physical, I guess animals you could call it, that have this free will that we're able to choose.
That's right.
There are, I guess, arguments that people make in terms of type of monkey species, types of apes that show some sort of consciousness or some form of understanding or thinking or choosing. What do you say to that kind of? I'm not sure if you've seen any of these experiments.
I've seen it, and I've been through it, and philosophy of mind is one of the areas that I studied with great detail. Now, you said that, I think, in a very beautiful way. We were talking about free will, and you said, what about these studies of animals that seem to show consciousness? Yeah, but that's not free will. Understanding? But that's not free will. And then at the very end you got to, and choosing. You think you realize yourself that consciousness doesn't imply free will, and understanding doesn't imply free will. Free will is another quality.
So what is the difference between what I said and free will?
I'll tell you the difference. The key difference. Maimonides says this clearly, and unfortunately, in some translations of Maimonides, they just get it dead wrong. So I'm not saying that because if you look it up in English, you could get a misimpression. The key to free will is that when a person does something, he could, at that moment, under those conditions, have done something else. What he didn't have to happen that way. Maimonides says clearly, of course, I'm reading the Hebrew. The Hebrew is a translation from the Arabic. Rabbi Matalan is an expert in Arabic. But animals have will. Human beings have free will. Animals act. But when they do something, there was nothing else they could do. So, and that's the respect in which human beings alone. And I don't think you have any evidence in the behavior of animals which needs to be interpreted. You can interpret and overinterpret widely, and that it's a fault very widespread in these studies. But there's nothing in animal behavior which requires the idea that when it did X, it could have done Y.
So all of if put in that situation, every single one of the test subjects would have done the same thing if the conditions were all the same?
No. What you do is partly determined by what you are. That's for sure. Right? Let's imagine that a person is blind. Put him in the same situation, he's not going to do what the person with sight is.
Species, let's say, for example.
Even so. Well, I'm talking about a blind person and a sighted person. They're both in the same species, right? Both human, last I checked. Right? No, it's not. It's that this creature, in this circumstance, at this time, when it actually happened, there it could have gone otherwise.
Maybe this is an oversimplification of an example, but what about like a dog and like the two owners go to different ends of a room and call the dog? Doesn't the dog have a choice on which one to go to?
What in the dog's behavior would make you think that it has a choice? It went to one, it didn't go to the other. To say that it had a choice would mean that under those very same circumstances, it could have done the opposite.
It should be random.
It did one thing. What would lead you to think that it could have done otherwise? Right? Rabbi.
You said earlier that humans have free will, which ultimately comes down to no divine intervention in causation. Does that also mean that there's no divine intervention in the effect?
No, doesn't mean that. That's a very important distinction. We have the freedom to choose, but after that, not the way I'm picturing it. There are other ways to talk about it. There are discussions to have. I'm picturing it. After my choice is made, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who engineers all the consequences. When I decide, when my hand goes up, it's because I decide that my hand should go up, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes it go up. We spoke about this the other day. I don't know which group is here, what days. We talked about everything being a partnership. That in everything that you do, you have the decision-making capacity, and he's the one who makes the world operate according to your decision. So the only point at which he's left room for us is in the decision-making process. Yeah.
What in the human action requires us to reach that he could have chosen the other way, like as opposed to the animal?
Well, in the case of the human being, it's self-knowledge. I mean, we know that of ourselves. We feel regret when we did something I should have done otherwise. Obviously, we are saying about ourselves, could have done otherwise. If I couldn't have done otherwise, then I wouldn't have had regret.
But what's outside of us? Because we are trying to get something outside of the dog.
Yeah. What's outside of us is the listener to whom I talk and I tell. And he knows from my words that he experiences exactly the same thing that I experience. Right? I have no reason whatsoever to think that a dog experiences anything like that. Now, mark my words. Here people, I said we have no reason to think that they have it. I didn't say they don't have it. I just say we have no reason to think that they have it. So you can have an open mind. You can wait for the evidence to appear. But There's certainly nothing in their behavior that requires that kind of interpretation. And I will just make, to end this, I'll just point out that over-interpreting what animals and other creatures do is a very common problem. There was an experiment that was done, not sure now whether, but the experiment, the way it was done, gives the illustration of this kind of over-interpretation. There's supposed to be a wasp called the digger wasp that kills spiders, digs a hole, buries them, and comes back and eats them when the spider is when the wasp is hungry. For planning for the future in a wasp, that was really considered to be quite remarkable. Wasps are pretty low down on the evolutionary tree, which is also probably irrelevant because crows are smarter than chimpanzees in certain ways. But okay, so the experimenter did the following. The wasp kills a spider, drags it up to a certain place, digs a hole, pushes the spider in, covers it up with dirt, and comes back later. So when the wasp does this, it's digging the hole, the experimenter pulled the spider, dead spider, away from the hole. Oh. The wasp goes back and gets the spider, pulls it up the hole, and starts to dig. Well, the vicious, brutal experimenter pulls the spider away from the hole. And the wasp stops and goes and gets the spider, goes back to dig. And that repeats until the wasp dies of hunger. Oh, so the wasp wasn't preparing for the future. The wasp was following a hard programmed routine with no thoughts of preparing for the future. Otherwise, when I got really hungry, we just eat the spider that had in front of it. So you have to be very, very careful about these things. The idea that chimpanzees have language has been long debunked, and there again, they overinterpreted what they saw. I just saw an article now about dogs. Do dogs feel guilt? And if you had a dog, when I was a child, we did have a dog, you can see behavior in the dog that looks very much like guilt behavior in people. The dog crouches into itself, it shrinks down and whimpers and so forth and so on. The article was written by a woman who happens to be an expert in dog behavior, and said, no, the dog's afraid of getting hit, that's all. Dog anticipates getting hit and doesn't want to get hit. Guilt with morals, values, failure, that's just overinterpreting. So you have to be very, very careful about the problem of overinterpreting. You get all sorts of, and by the way, there's a whole ideology in this. There's something called human exceptionalism, which preaches that human beings are significantly different from everything else. And the others want to say that that's a challenge to evolution. Hey, we didn't evolve from foxes? That's bad. Everything's got to evolve, right? So the more links you can find between human beings and animals, the more background you have for the idea that we're just better developed animals. And if these links break, then your ideology is in trouble. That's why they pay studies, they want books written. There was a Jewish professor at Harvard who was fired because he faked his data to get results like that maybe they have some kinds of moral values. The money is in showing continuity. That means when someone gives evidence for continuity, be suspicious, because that's where the money is. Have a wonderful time with the mentors.
Thank you so much.